Welcome to Gallery Wendi Norris. My name is Wendi Norris, and we're here in San Francisco in our offsite location tonight to welcome both Alexander Nemerov and Enrique Martínez Celaya for tonight's conversation. I wanted to say a little bit about the space that we're in for those that are here and have never been here before, and for those watching this on a recording. We are in San Francisco's historic Jackson Square, and this building that we're in was built in 1866. It's 11th on the historic registry in San Francisco, and it used to be a horse stable. So I just think it's really interesting when you're sitting in this environment with these wonderful bricks and this oaky smell. It almost smells like a wine cellar in here, just to provide some context for the work and maybe the conversation that's about to come. All right. So I have the honor of introducing both Enrique and Alexander this evening. Bear with me because I am going to read a few things. We represent what we call boundary-defying artists from the 20th and 21st century. And Enrique Martínez Celaya is just one of those artists. He's not just an artist, which I think you're going to hear about tonight. Enrique is also an author and a former scientist. The wilderness, which is on view here in this space and across the street, will be on view here through May 10th. It is our first exhibition with Enrique, and we just announced and added him to our roster late last year. Enrique's work is in collections and museums around the world. He has had milestone projects and exhibitions at the Huntington Library in Pasadena. It's extraordinary. If you haven't been there, please go visit. It just blew my mind recently. The Phillips Collection in Washington, D.C., the Berliner Philharmonie in Berlin, Germany, and the State Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, Russia. This fall, the Wendi Museum in Los Angeles will present a solo exhibition that culminates a trilogy of 3 deeply personal exhibitions that Enrique began last year at the Hispanic Society in New York, another extraordinary exhibition space if you haven't been, and the Museo Nacional de Bellas Artes in Havana, Cuba. Enrique is the author of 9 books on art, philosophy, and poetry. He has also just finished and co-authored a book with the Jungian psychoanalyst James Hollis. He is also the first provost professor of humanities and arts in the history of the University of South Carolina. And next,
Southern California.
Southern California, thank you, USC. Sorry, I wasn't trying to do that to you Trojan fans. Sorry, we're a little partial up here. We'll edit that out, right? And next week, Enrique receives the highest honor the university bestows on its faculty for distinguished intellectual and artistic achievement. He has also served as the Roth Family Distinguished Visiting Scholar and Montgomery Fellow at Dartmouth College. There are a lot of Dartmouth people in and around San Francisco, we've noticed, since he's been here. Enrique was born in Cuba and raised in Spain and Puerto Rico. He studied applied physics, literature, and art at Cornell University, the University of California, Berkeley, and the University of California, Santa Barbara. And if this isn't enough, he also holds 4 patents in lasers and laser devices. So any students in the audience better get busy, I think. This is a pretty rich resume. And I don't know that Professor Nemerov, Alexander Nemerov, needs much introduction for this crowd, but it is, suffice it to say, he has a wonderful bio, and is the author, most recently, of The Forest, a fable of America in the 1830s, praised by the novelist Annie Proulx as one of the richest books ever to come my way. Deeply beautiful, achingly painful, and astonishingly tender is how she refers to it. His book, Fierce Poise, Helen Frankenthaler in 1950s New York, was praised by Vogue as one of the best books of the year and was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award in Biography in 2021. Nemerov teaches art history at Stanford University. So with that, I turn it over to the two of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you all for being here. Enrique, we've known each other since 2019, and it was, for me, coming to your studio, which was then in Culver City, it was, I've said this before, but it was a little bit like, where have you been all my life? Like, these paintings are, touch my heart so much. And I know we'll talk about that a lot. I'm just struck by something Wendy said in your biography, which you mentioned Dartmouth, and I have an image of Robert Frost there, and the poet, and of how important he's been to you. I even have an image of you sitting on the green there. I didn't witness this, but it's in my mind's eye, like writing in your notebooks, thinking about Frost. Maybe it's not a thing necessarily as we look at these paintings to, collect and gather them into a sense of literature, but I'm wondering if you could speak about, say, Frost, just to get us going.
First, I want to thank you. Thank you, Wendy, and everyone in the gallery, all of you for being here. San Francisco is where my career started. So a very rocky starting, so very special. And I feel so grateful to be able to talk to you. I mean, I have huge respect for you, and I feel that, it's a wonderful thing to be with you here. So Robert Frost, poetry is very important to my work, mostly not as content. Artists usually use poetry as content for their work, imagery, and so on. But for me, what I'm after is the register, the emotional register and texture of poetry. Frost in particular, the apparent simplicity of Frost. I don't know if you know this incident, but in the 75th birthday of Frost, a critic, Trilling, stands up and say, "Let's toast to the darkest poet in America," or something along those lines. And everybody was shocked that the guy who wrote, The Road Not Taken was considered a dark poet, which of course, when you read his poetry, you immediately realize why that was the case. And I've always been interested in this apparent simplicity, commitment to life in the case of Frost, complexity of his family life and how he navigated that, and demand that the work was connected to, for example, the sound sense, the idea that the way people talked and the way people lived. I'm also interested in other things like the persona he creates of an artist. In some ways, people don't talk about that so much, but I'm interested in the problems of that. And of course, Dartmouth and that territory of New Hampshire and Vermont is so critical to his work, and his work is very resonant there. When you read his poems around those woods, they have a different feeling to them.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Frost as the quintessential New England poet, but as some of you know, he's from California, actually. He's from the Bay Area. And there's that poem, "Nothing Gold Can Stay," and the gold obviously has a connotation of right where we are, so I didn't really realize that I was invoking a local god when I started with Frost. But you have a picture of Frost and his son, Carol, in your studio, just a little picture.
Yeah.
And the son killed himself. And can you say why you have that little picture in your studio? It's not framed or anything, it's just among paints and objects, as I recall.
Yeah, in fact, I just finished a show at the Hood Museum at Dartmouth, all around Carol Frost and the relationship with his father.
Yeah.
I think I was always intrigued by this picture. The son is maybe 11 or 12 years old, and his father, they're both leaning against a fence. I was always intrigued by that picture. And pictures do a number of things. The first things they do is they tell you, you do not exist for me. And that's always a very haunting quality of pictures. And I always feel that everything is already in that picture of the history between father and son. And then when I have children of my own, when you have children, you never know how things are going to unfold. And I always wonder if Robert would have known how things will unfold with his son. And there is a passage when Carol committed suicide, Robert sent to his grandson, Prescott, a letter. And in that letter, he said something that, to me, is never far from my mind. At least it comes constantly because of that picture. That picture is partly there in my studio to honor that. He said, I tried so many times with him, and what I would do for the chance to try once more. And I think that sense, it's not just about Frost, it's about our movement in time and how we navigate regrets and unfinished business or near misses from the past, and how often we would like to go back and redo something, and yet moving forward with courage without letting that melancholic thing swallow you back. And that's what it is. Those two little apples next to the picture are actually from Robert Frost Farm in Derry.
Is that right? They're shriveled, kind of testicular
Yeah.
apples in your studio, yeah. I mean, that's how I understood them, but I didn't share that with you till just now, but I think that's how I took it, yeah. But you like mementos and places and the relation of writing and thinking to specific places. Yeah.
Although, let me just say, those things are not there for mementos as much as for pressure.
Yes.
So when all those things are in my studio, because it's very easy when you're an artist to get distracted or to get confused or to get tempted. And I think those things create a pressure, an obligation to
Yes.
live up to those things you respect.
Yes. One senses that everything in your studio, which is quite spare and has walls, something like the walls here down in LA, is intentional in that way. How do you experience the pressure of that photograph or these objects or any such thing? I mean, yeah, tell us more.
I mean, I think that the most obvious way is the connection, the obvious sense of having a family, and it's a lot harder to lie as an artist when you feel that you're going to look at your kid's face that same afternoon, and you will be a poser of some sort, and if no one knows it, but you know it, and in some ways, that little picture of Frost and Carol, the preciousness of that moment of them against that fence produces a certain pressure onto my work. Hemingway used the term a bullshit meter, saying that every writer should have a bullshit meter. And I think we need more than just that. We have a certain aspirational meter. So I think that's that one way. Above that, there's the last line for Leonardo's notebook is above that, a different form of pressure, of the sense of finite quality of all that we do. So, yeah.
Finite quality of all that we do. What's a saying you yourself paint on your walls or in the studio to exert an equivalent pressure?
Yeah, when I first built studios, and I've built a lot because I moved around quite a bit, the first things I write before I start working or do anything is keep your actions faithful, which is a Buddhist idea that your words and your thoughts and your actions would be faithful to each other. which, as we all know, is very difficult to do, and I failed at it constantly, but at least it's a reminder of what.
Yeah, I mean, could we speak about, just briefly, about Pomona in that sense? I think when you were alluding to San Francisco right at the start, that this is where your career started, this had to do with selling paintings in the park, and often not selling anything, is that right?
That's right.
Right, and then soon, this was in what, 1990?
In 1990, yeah.
Okay, so we cut to, what, is it 1994, and you're teaching at Pomona, but you don't stay, you resigned, and maybe keep your actions faithful. Maybe you could say something about that without, it's just had to do, I guess, with your quarrel with academia at large. But yeah, I'd be interested in that.
Yeah, to answer that, let me just take a quick step back behind. My family, we moved from country to country. We were born in Cuba, moved to Spain during Franco, to a very sort of difficult Spain at the time, a very depressed country, then to Puerto Rico. And the way out of all that, not just the way out in terms of financially, but spiritually and in the sense that when you are poor or when you are an immigrant, you tend to feel that you're in the bottom of a well looking up. When I sometimes look at my kids, I realize they have a much bigger perspective of the world. But when you are the way I was, you know nothing about the world, really. You're nothing other than your small neighborhood. So I start there to say, I went to school and did well and came here to Berkeley and was left my doctorate here because I had this pressure to make work. To make these paintings that I started as an apprentice for a painter when I was a teenager. So I saw my work in the parks. Needless to say, there was nothing glamorous about it. I lived in Oakland in a terrible little studio, but I'm grateful for it. So by the time my career begins to take off a little bit and I have enough credentials to become a professor at a college, I come with all this enthusiasm. And here's where maybe there's some academics here in the audience. Academia and American higher education is a beautiful thing in the world. It's the best system in the world, and anybody who has spent time with it, like you have, is worth of admiration. But there are many compromises and many things that are not what I have hoped. So when I resigned from that position, I wrote a letter, which maybe that's what you're referring to, because it became public, about why I felt that it was not keeping with the standards that I would like to keep for students. Which students are ultimately the ones that get hurt out of that, or the ones that don't get what they hope for. But anyway, I'm still in academia, so. I left it for a while, and I'm still in it, and I'm still in it because I still believe it's a shining star in the context of everything.
Yeah, I mean, I have my own quarrels with it myself. Going back to, but I'm grateful to be in it. But father and son, and so maybe we could just, I'm sensing a paternal presence here right between us. Do you want to say anything about this work, or in light of what we're talking about?
Sure. So I titled this exhibition "The Wilderness." Do I sound correct in this? Because I wanted to explore a dual wilderness, the wilderness inside us, most of which is unexplored. I like this line from Alan Watts that stood in front of the mirror and says, "Do you even know 10% of Alan Watts?" And I like that. So most of us is unexplored, and then of course the wilderness outside, the wilderness of others, also unexplored. And so what we know is such a small island of knowledge surrounded by a giant sea of non-knowledge, what we don't know. So I was interested in that exploration and give it different forms. And in this exhibition is the first time that I have brought in the painter as an image, which is interesting. I think it comes partly with age. I mean, I have been a painter painting since I was 11. So it's the best relationship I have, even though it's a complicated one, like many relationships tend to be. So I wanted to bring to San Francisco, where I really started, and at this moment in my life, the idea of the painter, and there are multiple paintings in the show that alluded to it. And this one in particular is especially charged. That curtain that you see behind was rendered 20 times, from the very realistic to the almost not recognizable, which is right now. The painting is a chunk, as you can see by the way the edges are treated. And I use that crude word chunk very much on purpose. It's a piece, it's a fragment, disconnected, disembodied in some manner. And then pushed against the curtain, the palette barely visible. And I think that that your connection to father and son is appropriate here, but because there's a certain sense of, there's a beautiful word in Spanish that it's not coming to me what the translation is in English, but those of you who speak Spanish, is desamparo. Desamparo is not to have, this is a crude translation, but not to really have protection or being left in the cold somewhat. And there's something about that. There's something performative about being a painter. I mean, look at me here and the paintings around. But what we're performing about is always extremely, not always, but in my case, is something that these things really mattered to me. You know, I didn't have my assistants make them. I didn't do 20 versions of any of them. Each one of them is an end in itself. So when I stand in an opening, for instance, sorry, I'm digressing, I'm moving around, but
I'm with you.
When I stand in an opening, I'm standing there fully aware that who I am most revealingly is around me in the walls. You know, it's like kind of. So in some ways, there's a sense of that here. So the painter here, you see right against this curtain with his palette sort of wedging into the body, not accidental, with that sort of frock coat and that particular expression. I'm glad that we're speaking in front of it, I guess.
Yeah. So speaking to painting as protection, as shield, but also it's still nonetheless the most vulnerable thing about you. And that has to do with being able to look in your kids' eyes and keep your actions faithful and all of that. Yeah, I mean, how has that been the way you've always been? Or is that something that comes with age, do you think? I mean, I know at the gallery opening that I remember seeing you at, where you were in your mode of being congratulated and being polite about it, but meantime, the real you is vulnerable on the walls. I remember you were asked to give a statement, and you quoted one of T.S. Eliot's 4 quartets, a passage from it, and that was absolutely no disrespect to the people of LA, but that was truly baffling to the people of Beverly Hills, I can tell you. but that was on purpose, right? Like you're not gonna like give them. I mean, you made it. You don't know what it's about exactly. You could frame the question, but yeah, I'm standing in a impressively marginal place, hearing you speak. Feeling in short my distance from the assembled multitude. I appreciated that moment, but I guess my question has to do with about as we get older, like the perspectives of a painter who's worked for a while. I mean, I don't know, as an art historian, I grabbed a book just coming up here on the Caltrain, and I risked being thought of as insufferably pretentious by my fellow Caltrain writers because I selected a volume of T.S. Eliot, actually, and I was, I don't know, the stuff about forgiveness and living with your faults and failures. How is that about keeping faithful as you get older?
Yeah. Eliot in the quartets, has, and then I'm going to come back to what you said, that idea that for us there's only the trying, the rest is not our business. Yeah. So there's, and humility is endless, two lines from the quartets, which are hunting. So, it's easy to kind of explain why I try to not be a painter. In fact, I highly recommend that people try that, because if you do decide to be an artist, for those of you who are artists, you know that that's not a cakewalk. Not just because what people tell you, because, you're going to starve, or because it's going to be so hard out in the world, but because the day-to-day doubt is unbearable. My brother is a surgeon, and he goes and works on somebody's eye, and he's certain that he did something good. I walk out of the studio after banging my head against a wall and painting, and then I think, well, is this good in the way Titian is good? Is it good in that way? How will I answer that? And then what am I doing? Am I just dabbling around here? Every artist struggles with this, and there's never anything that anybody can give you, no amount of titles, no number of titles, no success in the markets, that will ever convince you, unless you're a raging lunatic, that what you're doing is meaningful in the way that the works you admire are meaningful. So that's something to live with, which is not easy for artists. So for me, I tried to be a physicist, which I loved. And then this thing sort of pulled me back in, like Pacino says in The Godfather. And it saved me, ultimately. I think that I was a kid until I made the decision to shed all that I was told that I was good at in math and so on, and do this thing that, it's worth to understand what I'm saying. When I was trying to make this decision, I went down to Pigeon Point down here by Monterey to make the decision. For 5 days, I sequestered myself in this place and walked the beach up and down, decided, am I going to be a physicist or am I going to be an artist? On the physicist pile, I had a lot of credentials and awards and recognitions. And on the art pile, I had just my interest. That's a bad comparison. If anybody shows up to me with these two, and my kids show up with these two, I say, well, listen, this says a lot in that pile. So in some ways, once you make a decision like that, then in some ways you're obligated by the road that you have taken. Every time you feel lost or you feel confused about it, you always have the work to remind you why you're doing it.
Yeah, it's a lighthouse. It saves you from the rocks, as it were. Yeah. And you mean for that same intensity to relate to anyone who sees your work, too. That's something I'm very struck by. And maybe it's one reason why sometimes people don't know what to make of your work and seek for categories of understanding, is because, at least to me, it seems so patently generous in that it's, if I may put it this way, it's not about you. It's about what we share, who are we, and if physics and lasers and so on are your area of expertise, but yet one in which you felt somehow strangely not fully adult, it's somehow emerging into the the doubts and the conflicts and the questions that you're able faithfully to portray the curtain 20 times that is most relatable to other people. Because everyone, including me, would go around posturing and deflecting and defending and acting smarter than they are, and art has a special capacity to produce that in people. But meanwhile, we're all helpless and striving and deeply in need of something that feels genuine. And that's just my 2 cents theory why people love your paintings. But I often feel that they're not able to activate that quite. They're moved. Maybe that's all that needs to happen. But do you want to say something about the artist's mission to make it not be about them?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. And here's a moment in which I can use physics as a good guidance. You know, and I have mentioned this before, and when you're a physicist, you know some things, but you go to the lab only to learn what you don't know. That's the only reason you do research. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you can stand there and pontificate about the nature of quantum mechanics, but nobody cares. What people want to know is, how can you take this edge of the known, mm-hmm. You know, how do you push it further into the unknown? How do you discover something? So physics is an inquiry that you're prepared by your history and your knowledge, but ultimately that is only to get you to that edge, and from there you have intuition and you have all these processes. Art, I see it the same way, so it's not really about me. I don't come to these paintings like I sometimes hear artists talk about their artist statements, mm-hmm. and I want to do this, I want to do that, and mm-hmm. I don't want to do any of those things. I don't want to teach you a lesson. I'm using all my lessons for my kids, and they don't want to hear them anymore. I don't want to teach lessons. I don't want to tell you how intelligent I am, or how dumb I am, or how confessional. I don't want to tell you a story of my life. None of those things are important. I am not important. I come to these works to learn something new about the nature of reality, about the nature of art. The main question when I walk into the studio every time, the main question, the central question, is what is a painting? Mm-hmm. And even though, just like the scientists, I know quite a bit about what a painting is, that's only taking me to the edge of what I know, and then every day in the studio is answering that question again. The main thing that these paintings have here is their attempts at answering that question, above all. Before you look at this imagery or whatever, above all, they're an attempt to answer the question, what is a painting? Which is also a way to say, how does it function? So that's why I appreciate you saying that they're not about me, because the problem with figurative paintings is that people understand them like theater. They look at the figure and they relate emotionally through the actor that they perceive to be playing here in the stage. Mm-hmm. While for me, the painting is the entire rectangle and everything about it. The reason I paint and repaint these paintings many times is to try to achieve a certain presence. The experience is what I'm after. And that experience is what connects it to where we started with the poets I like. So when I read Thomas Tranströmer, the Swedish poet that I like, his poetry creates for me a certain register of emotional engagement. And then I said, oh, my paintings must do this.
Yeah.
And that aspiration.
Like with the photograph of Frost and his son, thresholds, edges. I know that painting there in the middle on that wall is of Picasso's studio after he died, or that it's got the vibe of that. It's based on a John Richardson photograph. And, I want to, just chime in art historically here and say there are no meanings, there are no interpretations of Enrique's work. It's not about that, but the building blocks of each physics problem, as it were, is to take us to the edge of the known. And I always think of this time I flew back from Madrid to New York, and the pilot, he just flew us right on the top of the clouds. It seemed like the whole flight, so just at that threshold, like almost just riding along this perfectly flat layer of cloud that seemed to go across the whole ocean. And the edge is related to clarity and uncertainty. Maybe that's what I'm trying to articulate, and that's what's most needful in a work of art. I could ask you about you in relation to the art world, if you feel that there's a discourse in the art world that gets that about you, but yeah, I don't know if you want to say anything about that, but I'm recalling in this context that you've said to me, like, Alex, this is the important work that we do. And maybe you could speak to what that important work is.
Well, when I read, for example, your book, The Floor is Who I Keep, which I keep in my studio, and now that I have read it, I just open it and read little parts, like completely sort of out of context, and I'm moved by the sharpness of the micro observation and the quality of your writing. Sometimes I don't even know what you're talking about at that moment because I haven't read, it's out of context. But it's sharply observed with a sensitivity, like an open sensitivity, almost like a raw sensitivity to the world, almost painful in some manner by seeing too much. Like you feel, and I think this is true whenever you're engaging, when one is engaging something very meaningful or a work of art, you almost have to see it through like a welding mask. It's too bright. And I sense that in your writing, it's too bright, but it is, and then you have to kind of quiet it down to read it. So when I see something like that, I am moved by what is happening. When I read T.S. Eliot, say the Four Quartets, or perhaps Miguel Hernandez, or when I see the last painting of Titian, or when I look at a passage of Velázquez, for example, or whatever it may be, I realize the immensity presented here. But the immensity is an immensity of a word that is sometimes misunderstood, an immensity of ambition. We tend to use the word ambition mostly to refer as a negative thing, like ambition for money or something. But there's an ambition of spirit, an emotional ambition, an ambition of intelligence. The ambition of intelligence is tricky because the ambition of intelligence is always a frustrated ambition. Intelligence is never good enough, except when it can get out of the way and allows you to see through it.
Yeah.
But so that's what I mean by that largeness. And to me, and this I'm saying it, but I'm posing it to you as a question, because it's a question that exists in my mind. If you're not doing that, then what are you doing? Mm-hmm. Like, I don't understand the other answer. So, like, to me, the only answer that makes sense is, yes, you're going after that ambition, even if you fall flat on your face. I'd rather fall flat on my face and fail miserably at those kinds of attempts than be a successful person making pastiche of our work that everybody likes.
Yeah, Yeah, I'm almost grimacing because it's such an exacting standard, but it's the only one. To fail and flail out at the edge of the cloud and the blue sky, to reach for the stars, as they say, and to thereby portray how infinitely distant they are, and yet to succeed by means of one's failure in raising the stakes for all of us. Why don't people, well, I think people who are here obviously do respond to those kind of questions, but I think it's also so human to feel a work of art is contained in its box. It has a certain, we need to contain it intellectually when its gift to us is that it's a threshold onto something else. And let me just say something about this in terms of the relation of art and life, which of course we all seek and also all are terrified by, because it's nice to retreat from the street and be with the work, but we also must believe that the work, like a good poem, is connecting us more fully to life. I just feel like your work occasions the most remarkable responses that are even indirect, but so emotionally intense as such that I can't help but keep a little mental log of them as they occur. They're coincidental or not, but I'll just give you two, and therefore give all of you two. At this Beverly Hills opening, or this was, 2022 actually, I was minding my own business, and it wasn't like another show I went to in New York where this woman approached me and strangely said that I reminded her of Andy Warhol. I was like, that's the only time I've ever heard that. But this was another occasion. It was with your paintings. The King at Nightfall was there, so with its Eleatic title. And a woman came up to me, and she's out of nowhere, middle-aged woman. She said, I'm a very highly paid defense attorney, and my clients are all awful people, and I know that they've done it. I know they've committed the crimes that I defend them from. And she wasn't weeping, she wasn't laughing, but it was this strangely confessional thing, which I've always associated with. There's just it's like a come to Jesus, your paintings. I mean, there's no, it's not bullshit, and it's not, these paintings don't deflect. I mean, can you imagine living with this in your house? I mean, unless you're, unless, which no one here would be, but unless one would be a truly soulless individual, it would be hard not to feel the force field of this work or any of these works. The deer in the other space remains my favorite among these. But the other one, it's not exactly a response to your work, but I'm going to say, for that very reason, it actually is more so. And I haven't even told you this, and I've never told anyone because it was kind of a sacred moment, but I'm going to invoke it here with, hopefully wishing the best to the person who told me, who was my Lyft driver, who picked me up to drive me from your studio to LAX in February. And we were talking, about this and that, but he was talking about his son who was killed in a car crash, and when he was 22 or so. And he was telling me that his son used to say he didn't think or even want to live beyond 30, but he was a very beautiful son. And at a stoplight, the driver told me this, and he was speaking, emotionally, but in control. But I said, well, does your son ever come back to you in dreams and so on? And he said one time he did, and he said the son appeared and said, "It's okay, Dad." And I don't know. That was like these paintings to me. Have you, maybe because you're the artist, you're insulated, people are polite or intimidated or something, they don't get real with you, but have you noticed these kind of responses, which aren't really, to say the least, art worldy responses? They're kind of more, they're more powerful than that?
Yeah, there are many people who I am close with through the work mediated a relationship. And I have been very grateful and very touched by many of the letters that I have received in the studio from people that I never met, that had a relationship with the work. And I have had this relationship with some works myself. I was raised Catholic and left the church. I walked out of my first communion at 11. So, and never came back. That hole that religion left in my life was the hole that art occupied. So for me, while somebody else who is religious perhaps reaches out to their own understanding of scriptures, of God, or whatever it may be, to me, I always reach out to art. That's what I reach out to in the form of literature and visual works. And it is, I have been rescued so many times by works of art. Some of you that know me from other situations, you know that sometimes I can come across as intransigent and ungenerous when some crap of our work is presented as something great. And the reason is not because I'm insulted because I'm an artist. The reason is because I am fighting in defense of some great works of art that have made such a difference in my life, and the sacrifice and devotion that these people have done for something, that when somebody else calls their mercantile poster a painting or poetry or something, I feel like I have to say something. So I don't even know where that came from. But so for me, I think that for example, like there have been moments in my life that poetry has lifted me when nothing else has, or coming to an Albert Pinkham writer painting at the right time, or being absolutely transformed by an encounter with an unexpected painting in some chapel somewhere.
I mean, there's this saying that's kind of occurred to me as I'm walking my dog in Palo Alto, or at other times, but it feels right to me, which is, as I get older, it feels that only what is unbelievable is true. That the rest of it is just facts of different kinds or opinions. But it's the thing that you've never seen before that you recognize, as Deanne Arbus said. We carry our roots around with us, as you've said about this painting. And there's new growth from that. It's shepherding and protecting who we are. It's being burdened.
Can I say something that connects to what you said?
Yeah, go ahead.
So that idea of the unbelievable. So these paintings are the consequence of what I couldn't destroy. So the paintings that I understand, which is a lot of paintings, I understand a lot of paintings, I will destroy. So any painting that I know how it works, I know why it works, I know the good parts of it, I will destroy. So I use my knowledge of painting, which I am, I spend a lot of time thinking about painting. I use my knowledge of painting as a fire, as a line of intolerance, like anything that I can make sense of or produce, then I will destroy. So leaving that part that you were talking about, that which cannot be explained despite knowing a lot. That's why, to tie up and have the last moment of diatribe, the part of the idea that I can construct for an assistant, let me tell you, make a painting and do this and then do another version like that, another version like that the paintings can actually be explained in that manner.
Oh.
And execute it, and that the result somehow will maintain that unbelievable, unimaginable quality is so silly to me. It's like a joke. So for me, these paintings here were painted many times over until what's left here, even though I can talk about it. In the same way that my son, who is sitting there, I can talk about him, but I cannot explain him. I can tell you things about him. I have known him since he was a little boy. But even if we stay here all night and I talk about him, the kernel of what he is at the core is out of reach for me.
Yeah.
And that's really ultimately the part that really matters.
And that's what you're giving to other people, is you're giving a frame for the unknown. And to do that, you need to be faithful to your own standards of not understanding something as the most integral, the most grave gesture and most freeing gesture you can offer to yourself and to others. Yeah. I was mentioning about roots, and it's a whole life lived that way. I can imagine that this is how you've always been, and you have mentioned childhood here. This may not be the right context, but I'm struck by a story you told me once at USC about the ducklings. And I'm wondering if you could just reflect on that biographically as a kind of fuel for what we're seeing here, I have my stories from childhood, et cetera. We all do, of course. But it's kind of an unbelievable story, but it's true. So, and I just want to say that with sons, like my daughters here, like, it's true, like, the unknown in a person would be their soul. The unknown in a painting would be something in combination with that. And I just want to say that if art is your religion, I do think it's interesting, and it's maybe one reason we're friends, is that train has long since left the station, where we may be the last two people who really believe that. And my students, maybe. That era is dead. People don't believe art is a gospel. People have this attitude about art a lot of times, like, that kind of thing. It's not the like 1950s, like the Wolfgang Palin thing, where 1949, art's a religion, like it's supposed to knock you back and like make you change your life. We don't do that now. So instead of calling us like antiquated, I'm just going to say we're untimely. But okay, so yes, the ducklings, the roots.
So the duckling story. So, like, one of the distinctions that I have tried to make, which is I don't do a very good job, even though I try many times. Someday I will do it right. But I say my work is not narrative because it's not interested in an arc. A narrative has certain arc. I'm interested in moments that we all have them. Mm-hmm. That life, there's a discontinuity in life. There's a fracture or a brightness in a moment in life that if, with this tiny brain that we have, that we try to understand it and we try to grab the immensity of that moment, which is just flashing in front of us. And we know there's something there. Mm-hmm. We know there's something there so bright that if we could only understand what was there, or not understand is not the right, recognize what's there, we will have access to something much deeper. But it is elusive, it's out of reach. And those moments is what intrigues me about painting, about poetry. Those are the moments that I'm interested in working about or working on. The ducklings, when I was a young boy in Cuba, it's a crazily simple and charged story. My mother, I was 6, my mother had given me 3 ducklings, and tiny yellow ones. And one day I arrived from school looking for them, and they were gone. And at that moment, I realized that flash of fear that I realized that I had not put them in the box that I was supposed to put them. So I already start at a sense of anxiety of my own neglect and carelessness. And then I walk out into our yard, and I see these 2 boys standing over this giant hole, which was being made to be a septic tank. And I walk over there with that kind of knowingness that you sometimes walk something. And the Cuban soil, you have to picture this, it's very reddish. And at the bottom of the hole, there's water. And these boys are laughing, and I go there and I realize they have taken the ducklings and crushed them against the bottom of the hole. And they're bigger kids than me, and I feel both the carelessness of my actions that led this to happen, and the fear of this confrontation. And then for some unexplained reasons that I cannot trace back, at that moment, I pull out from my pocket this little 2x2 photographs that a teacher, my mother was a teacher, so one of her friends had given me a picture, doesn't make any sense, of her daughter, who was my age, and I had it in my pocket. So I pull it out. I don't know why. And one of the boys grabs it from my hand, takes out his penis, and rubs his penis on the face of this little girl while I'm standing there watching this thing, trying to understand what was happening. Even now, many years later, that's an incomprehensible event. Not incomprehensible because of the facts, and incomprehensible because all that happened there. Sometimes I think that I spend then many years of my life after that getting into fights all the time, and I think in no small part that event was a catalyst for it. But it's a mixture of carelessness and waste and desecration and betrayal and loss and sadness and all those things that go. So imagine then, let's come back now to the present. So that event exists in me, and there are many more events, I think, exist in all of you. And then say I stand in front of a white canvas and back away and make something just really cool. And back away and say, wow, that's so cool. And I'm going to let that be. Even though I'm living with that event in me. And I will, so of course, it cannot be. The living with that event on me means that the work somehow, in some manner, have to live up to the seriousness implied by that moment.
Wow.
Yeah.
And this is so life-affirming for you. And I think people respond to that. I'm recalling something you said to me in the studio in February, which was, and I'm totally with you on this, and I actually quoted this the other day in class, I think, but you were saying, like, seeing all the happy people on your phone makes you sad. Being in the presence of the truth makes you feel peaceful. And so when I talk about the affirmative nature of being so connected to that indelible moment and others, drawing on it as a kind of infinite source, am I right in thinking that that's where you draw your strength from, actually? Yeah. And I would just say something else, which is, I'll nominate myself for this, but obviously it's true for a lot of people. Like, we get to our trauma, our despair, and we think that's the most deluxe thing about us. It's, in a way, the most gorgeous and shiny and distinctive thing about us. And we want to lock with it and love it because that's where the truth is, and no one can take that away from us. And if we really want to go for it, we can weaponize it and so on. But you're using that kind of thing as a medium to go somewhere else.
Sure.
Yeah.
Like, I was in Venice this past summer, and walking around seeing people crucified and in pain and in sorrow, and people, like, I was so elated and full of life, and I thought, like, everything was possible in the world of art. And then I pop into some bubblegum art fair where I see some plastic thing going like this, and I feel like life is coming to an end.
Yeah.
I can't go on anymore. So,
That's it. I wrote a book about Macbeth and the Civil War, so like a double whammy of bloodshed and so on. And when I taught at Yale, I think Lucy even went to this, like, those drama undergrads say, we're going to do a production of Macbeth based on your book. And I thought, wow, that's really flattering. And we sit down, seats like this, and like on the audio as the first scene begins, there's machine gun fire. And I'm thinking, that's maybe not correct, but okay. I don't think they had machine guns in the Civil War. Anyway, whatever. It was a brilliant production that kind of went off the rails. But my main point is, I loved it. Wow. Macbeth and the Civil War. I just was in heaven. I was so in heaven that when I drove from New Haven to Albany to check some footnotes after doing 20-hour days of finishing the book, I just remember driving home and there was this picture of a gas, like from the gas station, just this picture of like a gas station right there. And I just thought, that's so interesting. There's like this gas pump icon on, and I was so kind of blissed out by all my absorption, I didn't realize that meant like I needed to get gas for the car. And then I experienced, as perhaps, I hope no one here has experienced this, but when you're on the interstate and to cut to the chase, you experience a sudden slowing down. And, I always give a shout out to my fellow Connecticut drivers for not killing me. But anyway, I sort of hold that up as a sign of this elation in it's not really elation in despair, but elation in truth, right? Like you feel like you're actually touching something, which any one of us would nominate as the very purpose of art. It's the only standard, but we're alienated from that for some reason. Yeah, so what was maybe we'll turn to questions, but I'll ask you one. What's your favorite crucifixion in Venice?
That's a hard question. That's a hard question because there's a lot, like depending on there was an encounter that I had. So, so I'm looking at this beautiful, Titian, and doing the Tiapolos and all this. But then I went to this unexpected place. There's the little island where they do a weaving. And it's no Murano, it's the Burano. So I go in it. Yeah. So so I went there because they told me to go, and so I went, and then there was a little church there that not just visitors. Yeah. So
Wait. Go ahead.
yeah. So I walked in, and there was no one in it, and then I see this, this just spectacular painting. I forgot I even forget what it was. It was Tiepolo.
It was a Tiepolo.
Yeah, so
I had the same experience.
Yeah. So then I was
Same
like,
painting.
Yeah. So I walked out. I don't know what happened.
I've got it on my phone.
Yeah. So I walked out of that church like this.
Wow.
And then they're trying to sell this little fabric stuff, and I don't know what I'm doing. After that. So I think I don't even know how long I was in there. Yeah. But I was.
Yeah, 1729. Not a bad year for painting. Huh? Yeah. All right, so I think we could do a couple questions, yeah. So we have a mic here. Remember to wait for the mic, and it's a show of hands, so who would like to ask Enrique a question? Right here, Daniel, right here? Or there's two over here.
Well, I want to thank both of you so much, and it just is amazing to me that this conversation can take place where the word sacred earlier was used by you without irony and apparently without feeling nervous about it. And Enrique, I know already, I know your work, I know the depths, and I wonder if you think, either of you, that there's a shift going on where this old phrase that I remember, I'm older than most of you, art, philosophy, and religion, rolled off the tongue, and it was thought without irony that these were the three avenues where we might approach the deepest possibilities of this mysterious existence, that there's something coming back that survived the postmodern critique, where there's this kind of work and this kind of sharing that you've shared and these kinds of the depths of your search have been brought to us tonight. It's tremendously encouraging to me.
Thank you. Were you asking me something?
Do you think something's shifting where we're moving into some space where this kind of sincere search can be taken seriously and not considered, I don't know, a victim of a flawed epistemology through the various things from the postmodern critique,
I think that we tend to think of moments in time as whatever is popular or most distributed. But I think in any moment in time, there were always people that maybe were lost or unheard that had these concerns. Some they were ignored or they were put aside. Some of them got their voice heard here and there. I mean, you yourself with your writings. And I think we are in the same place. Alex is an art historian, so he can give you better context, but my sense is the world have always been more or less the same. When I read, Renaissance text, and I realize, oh my God, these guys are struggling with the same things. It doesn't look that way to us because we go to museums and we see some things. We don't know the material reality of them, of the problems with the Pope for Michelangelo's painting the Sistine Chapel, running out of money and struggling with this, but I think there are always pockets. There are always pockets here. The situation that Wendy and the gallery have created for us to be able to talk. And I think we should not underestimate the power of that. I think we tend to think in terms of numbers. But art is never really about numbers. It just seems superficially that way. But it's one encounter at a time, one direct experience at the time. So I think that what maybe we could, each one of us, do to produce whatever change we hope to be, is to not participate in the lies and to be truthful, to be informed. So when you say something like truth or sacred, and people say, oh, you're a dilettante, you don't know anything, you actually know something. So you can put people in their place, which is always important, to kind of create a space for things that matter, and do not tacitly or implicitly create the idea that all that there is what's happening in these environments that you hear about.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. That's inspiring for me to hear, that it's never about numbers, that I don't know if something's coming back as so much as it's never left. And I would invoke Kierkegaard here, and I just gave a lecture last week about Van Gogh and earnestness. Earnestness is a high term of praise for Kierkegaard, and he connects it to simplicity, seriousness, and sincerity. And it does knock people back, but I think in the way you're talking about it, it's wonderfully vivid and powerful, that seemingly square word, earnestness, when it meets irony. And Kierkegaard, writing in the 1840s, says, and I'm sure he's right, he says, irony envies earnestness. So if you think about that, like imagine it as like a high school party where irony is the too cool for school, like high school quarterback or drama queen or whatever it is, and earnestness is over in the corner with the flooding blue jeans and the glasses and all that. Irony envies earnestness, and it's true. And it's one thing for artists, but it's another thing for anyone who looks at art, because it's always time to be real. And so what you like or don't like is always keyed to who you are and who you are becoming. And I think that's one way that your work is so grounding, for me at least, and I know for many people. So time for one more question, yeah? Or maybe a couple more, yeah? Okay.
Yeah, and Enrique, thank you so much for being here. My question comes, I guess, from a kindred spirit of an itinerant childhood and all of the challenging notions and ideas of home that brings. I look at the piece in the corner over here, and I can't help but think of that image of Celia Cruz returning to Cuba, Guantanamo Bay, reaching out and taking the soil, knowing she'll never be able to set foot again in Cuba so that she can be buried with the soil. And I'm curious, what through your experience of painting have you discovered about, some of these challenging, perhaps, notions of home and identity?
So let me see how I can very quickly do justice to this question. There is a radical homelessness that I am interested in. One of the one of the most painful parts of that homelessness and homesickness that comes with it is the inability to believe in kind of the sentimental home. See, a lot of times, like, there's a double homelessness when, say, you don't belong, or you left, or you lost the place where you once belonged, but you cannot weep along with some sort of sentimental sense of what that is. As like many of the things that I heard people say about for example, being in exile and so on, I found it unbearable because it seemed to be a layer of sentimentality and melodrama that prevented me to get to the meat of some truth of loss. So it's mediated loss is not really loss for me. So part of what I have tried to do in my work, feeling not just a stranger because I lost my country, but because I lost my religion, because I did not feel like I belonged where I was. Because, even in the context of art, that I am a Latin artist who, for the most part, curators of Latin American art would not think as a Latin artist, as the acquisitions will show. It will be the Europeans. Those are many ways to be homeless, and there are more. So to answer your question, the way to reconnect with the idea of home is to have a radical sense of being without land, and then trying to find and explore that in the work, not to illustrate what that means, because that's storytelling. If we have a pizza together, I can tell you a story. But that's not what painting does or what it's good at doing. So for me to discover a land, and this is partly what I'm doing here. When I said half jokingly, I was only half jokingly when I said painting was my best relationship. And it's my best relationship because it has given me a home. So that's what it is. And sometimes I find that most of what I hear, and this is, I recognize, and perhaps an unpopular statement about identity and so on, is just illustrations of that. It's illustrations of the search for identity, but it's not the search for identity. Illustrations of the loss of home, but it's not the loss of home. Illustrations of what it means to be forever a wanderer, but not what the thing is in itself. And to come back to Kierkegaard, that idea of the thing in itself is very important to me. So that's when I said earlier, I have no lessons to teach or no wisdom to impart in the work, is because the illustrations of those things, which is mostly what I see, do nothing for me.
I think it's a hard thing for artists or for anyone to learn, is that your expertise is not the end. It's the start of what you can do. Or as you say, you use your intelligence to let the intelligence get out of the way, right? So if it's okay, we'll just do two other quick questions. We have one here and then one here, and then we'll conclude.
I was just wondering, how do the paintings change when they're released into the world? For example, we exalt over the work, we love it and pour our love into the work, and I feel that changes the work. And then what happens in generations to come when the young people look at it and say, we don't believe in the work anymore? How does that affect the work itself?
My explanations, of the way I think about this question that you're asking and related questions around, is perhaps a quaint way. So I'm going to apologize before, but sounded ridiculous. I think it's very much like children, and I think it's almost a one-to-one correlation. I realize that not everybody has children, but most of you imagine what it's like to have one, except waking up when they're young. But for example, like when I have a child, the child at the beginning was all me, really. And I mean, there was another creature there, but they're mostly vessels. And as they grow, they gain an independence. So if I take your question, I say, what happens to my kid as he goes into the world and get bounced around and all the things that happen to a kid as he goes into the world? Well, of course, what I'm hoping is that what I did in relationship to that child was enough and righteous enough that now that is an autonomous being from me that will move to the world in its own way. So when I am making a work, I know that a work is finished when it's autonomous from me and has a resonance. Now it can go into the world and do its own thing. I have prevented for many, many years, for instance, I have made some choices for many years that didn't do any group exhibitions, or very few and very selective. Partly because I didn't want my kid to be hanging out with those other kids. Now I am more relaxed about it, but I am hoping that once they have that autonomy, they can move to the world. Sometimes when a work, like Clifford Steele's idea, I understand them a bit. Like when a work has traveled around and maybe it's the ugly duckling work that people didn't like, or it comes back to you, or something happens, it's time to put him away, to put that work away for a while. I don't need to destroy like Clifford Steele, and put him away, because I don't feel like I can see that work anymore, really. It's like it's somewhat invisible to me or confusing to me. But, for the most part, it's very difficult for us to look at a work of art, especially a work of art that we admired, because there are too many layers in between us. I mean, if I stand in front of, say, Manet, who I love, I don't even know if I can really see Manet. I've been studying Manet my whole life, and there's too many layers in it, or Velázquez or something. And I think we all do that. We all have a projection in front of our faces. And as artists, we have 27,000 projections when we're working on it. We arrive with so many a priori preconceptions of what a work is. Not what you put in it, but what it is, that already constrains very much the experience.
Yeah, I'm struck by your point from earlier, from Eliot, ours is but the trying. So you try to raise a good kid, and then after that, it's out of your control. But also coming back to this idea of the sacred, that I'm reminded of the poet Osip Mandelstam's idea about the poem as the message is the message in a bottle, and it lands on a far shore. Whoever happens to pick it up is the recipient of it. And I would say that even granting all the different layers and mediations and changing tastes or whatever the case may be, there will always be that person who might be there who will pick it up, and it will be intended for them. And that's something that can't be AI'd out of the world or legislated or kind of buzzkill, like academically buzzkilled out of the world. It just kind of is a thing. Although I do say, before we get to the last question, is I tell my students, maybe it's a provocation, but I tend to believe it is. I'm not worried that, I think there'll always be art. Whether there'll be anyone to view it or see it, that's another question. And I don't mean by that like numbers. Obviously, are going to art shows more than ever, but I mean, see it in the way we're talking about. I don't know that will. I can tell you from my Stanford students, I feel good about. They know how to see, how to feel with humility, and but in the world at large, I'm not so sure. Yeah, last question.
I'm going to try to, I have so many questions. Thank you, by the way, for sharing your unknown through your art. I work in the science field, so I'm an engineer, but I work with a lot of scientists. So your background with applied physics and art kind of, I should click with how we started this event with Robert Frost's The Road Not Taken, which you did in your life. You were a successful scientist and left that behind, but took the less traveled road, which we are here right now for everyone to see. So I'm going to read the last 3 lines. 2 roads diverge in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So in your life right now, where you are right now, have you seen the difference between you being a scientist, former scientist, and an artist? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can't help. I can't help but to. I love to remind everyone that poem's title is "The Road Not Taken," because it's important. You know, a lot of the time when that poem by Frost gets brought in, it sounds like Frank Sinatra, "I Did It My Way," and the thing about that poem is, you know, where he stands there and look down both roads, and as far as the bend on the undergrowth, and tries to say which one should I take, and he doesn't name that poem "The Road Not Taken" for no reason, because that's the one that was left unexplored, and there is some humility and burden on that road that is not taken. So a lot of the time, we focus in those last 3 lines, which in some ways sound triumphant. It's just the way it turned out. The way it turned out that this is the life we left. You know, so many of my friends are still scientists, and I think science suffers some part of the cynicism of the 20th century that Peter Sloterdijk talks about, but at least among scientists, there's still the belief in truth of some manner. And that's a big deal. I think in the humanities and the arts, we think that it's a sign of great insight when we kind of like wink at each other and tell that there's no truth and all of that. So I am so grateful to have that conviction that reality is so immense and so full, and there is such thing as truth. Maybe eludes me, but it still exists. So, but now coming back to the question you posed, I feel so grateful when I arrive at my studio every day. So grateful to have that freedom. And to be able to dedicate my life to these questions. You know, one of the things about physics, if some of you are scientists here, you probably will relate to this. You can go for a couple months in physics without thinking of nothing else. I mean, when I was a grad student in Berkeley, I mean, I would just only think physics and maybe eating. So this makes me think, if you and I are having this conversation, this can be part of my work. Nothing is outside of the work. No question. You know, when I was when my kids were little, they were in their work. When I am asking myself questions of aging, or when I see my father, I remember this, looking at him one day and generating all this work. I just saw my dad lean over, and I saw his arm looking older, and realizing something that one of those bright moments that you say, well, there's a lot to do there. And that's the great thing about being an artist, that everything is possible. When Wendi was talking in the introduction, I don't know what the limits of art is. Not everything is art, but everything can be so. And to me, my interest in literature, philosophy, I think of them as art. I think of this as poetry. I don't think of them as paintings a lot of the time. So that is such a gift in a society of specialization as we have been doing for the last 200 years. Everybody needs to be specialized. Everybody needs to have a certain expertise. So I feel, sorry I'm going on and on, but I feel that it was not easy to do this, and I disappointed a lot of people when I did it, not least of which my parents. But I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful. And then at this stage of my life where I can write, my position at the university, I mostly teach literature and philosophy, which I enjoy teaching more than art these days. So art, all the field is ours as an artist. And that is a huge gift. The only moments I wish I was a scientist again is when I hear a lot of people in the art stuck. and then I miss the concreteness of physics. But yeah.
All right, thank you, Enrique. Thank you all. Yeah, thank you very much.